Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
This is your host, Alicia Debrell from Insight Media. Today I get the privilege to interview Billy Alt, a veteran of the U.S. Marine Corps Reserve and a licensed real estate broker out of Las Vegas, Nevada. Alt, a father of two beautiful girls, has over 12 years of experience helping both buyers and sellers with their real estate transaction in the Las Vegas market. In today's interview, Mr. Alt will go into great detail from the types of different real estate investments, the types of financing available, and everything a Las Vegas real estate investor needs to know. Billy has won awards from the Veterans Association of Real Estate Professionals, Top 100 Agents in the Las Vegas Valley, Realtor of the Month from Greater Las Vegas Association of Realtors, 3-time 40 Under 40 winner, and many, many more. Also, the current chair of Market Trends Committee to keep his pulse on the ever-changing market. He believes it's important for investors to have an agent that also invests in themselves. Alt's years of experience and extensive knowledge of the Las Vegas market makes this for a great interview. So, without further ado, I want to welcome Billy Alt to the show. Hi, Billy. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Alicia. Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
All right. Can you tell me, I know I had a pretty decent introduction for you, but is there anything else you would like to tell us about yourself or your business experience?
Absolutely. I am passionate about the veterans in our community, so I use real estate investing and sales to give back. And I'm a true believer in when you make money, you give back to your local community, and that truly is what we should all be doing, and sharing your passion with the people that you make money in that local community.
So can you tell me a little bit about who you help and how you help them?
Absolutely. Being the past president of Veterans Association of Real Estate Professionals, VA rep, of 2015 and 2016, I've had the opportunity to run a board to help the local community of veterans, meaning that we raise money and sometimes we get tax-free homes to donate to local veterans that are in need. For instance, we had Mr. Elders in 2015 that was a Vietnam veteran, Purple Heart, double Purple Heart, Bronze Star Award winner, and he never owned a home in his entire life. And as you may know, or we may know, Vietnam veterans didn't get a great welcome home when they came back from Vietnam. So it was a blessing to hand over the keys to him. We raised over $50,000 in our local community by doing different fundraisers, etc., and donations. And we were able to get a house free from the Bank of America, and then we were able to rehab it with that money raised and hand over the keys to him mortgage-free. So it was great. And we've done that with 2 other deserving veterans since then. And hopefully we could do a lot more in the future. We got the state of Nevada, Governor Sandoval, to donate a house last year, which we're starting to see the light where the local communities and the politicians are starting to see that we can actually, together as a ripple effect within a community, we could make a difference by teaching them the investment, because the state is sitting on houses that they are not making any money on, and we're able to take them over mortgage-free and then raise the money locally to rehab them. And it's great to have a veteran that deserves it to be in your community instead of an eyesore.
Definitely. Do you help only veterans? Who else do you help in real estate?
No, absolutely. I truly believe in home ownership. That's why I was attracted to real estate. My quick real story was growing up, my parents were never able to afford a home, right? They were always trying to save for that American dream in the house. And finally, they did a lease option right before I went to the Marines when I was in high school. And it was a fraudulent lease option where they got foreclosed on and the guy took their money. So I always remember growing up how important that was for home ownership and investing. And I remember the landlords always being the rich people, right, or the wealthy. And I always wanted to be that person. So for me, I have a passion for home ownership and investing. And every day, I don't care if it's $100,000 or $1 million house, handing over the keys to a client or teaching them how to invest to build their wealth for the future is truly my passion. And that's why I do what I do.
So I know that you do help out a lot of real estate investors. So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
What are the type of different real estate investments you can make, and what are the differences between them?
That's a great question. And one great thing about real estate is you can make money in so many different aspects of real estate and in any market, up or down. And in Las Vegas, where I'm from now, we've seen both sides of that story, right? So we were number one on the way up and number one on the way down, and today we're back to level in the middle, right? So I've had the experience in the last 13 years to be able to see both sides. So I've felt that I've been able to keep a pulse on that, how to make money on both sides of that spectrum. So starting with, I guess, the novice investor, the beginning investor, and a lot of people like to stick to the buy and hold strategy, where they leverage with the banks because the interest rates are still low. They would buy a house, maybe 20% down, or even less they could, but without mortgage insurance, it's 20% down. And cash flow, even if it's break even or cash flow, a couple $100 a month, their goal is to leverage that property, and as appreciation happens in the future, they're getting a bonus appreciation. Whether, from being back in '05, we never guarantee appreciation, but it's always good to cover your cost monthly on the rent, and then anything appreciation is a bonus. Okay. So number two would be flips. Everybody wants to talk about flips, and it's I call it like 102. It's not 101 investing, it's 102, because you have to know and have a great team around you and have to know your numbers. So it's not for the beginner investor unless they have somebody around them to mentor them. I was blessed to have an investor that believed in me back in the crash, and probably about '08 or '09. That was an Israeli investor that believed in me, and we were able to go to the auction down on 3rd Street over here, the public auction, and buy foreclosures, rehab them, and resell them for really good profits at the time. What we did is we created a team. We would have somebody bid for them at the auction. We'd pay for it cash. I would take it from there and do an eviction or a rehab if needed. And at that point, we would go and estimate the cost of rehab, the ARV, which is the after repair value, and make sure that our numbers are in line with what our potential profit should be, or what our numbers need to be. So at that point, that investor wanted at least 15% net after everything, and we made usually more than that, but you have to know your numbers going backwards before you get into an investment. There's also the way to flip properties via the regular market without going to the auction, because there is more risk in the auction, I want to mention. You are taking over the liens on the property when you buy at the auction. You're taking over any IRS liens, any second liens, anything like that. So you have to account for those costs within your numbers. If you go to and buy short sales, you're getting title insurance, so you don't have to worry about previous liens necessarily. So therefore, you could work your numbers a little bit easier because you can get to look at the property before seeing it. When you buy at the auction, you usually don't have time to go into the house or access to it. When you buy a short sale or a foreclosure, you're able to go and view the house and maybe do your own on-point inspection previous to putting in and do some due diligence. So it's a little bit safer with that option. You may make less cash flow or return on investment at that point, but at least it's safer. It's better for a beginner investor that way. And the worst case scenario is you could go ahead and rent it out and still make cash flow if you couldn't sell for the amount you wanted. There's also other types of investing, like I've invested as being a lien holder for somebody else's investment, just lending money to them and making a percentage of a deal or a straight interest rate based on being a lien holder for that investor. And that's a great way of investing as well. And I love, one of my favorites is self-directed IRAs, which most people don't understand or know about. Typically, stockbrokers don't mention it because they don't make commissions on the sale of a self-directed IRA. But the government allows you to roll your 401k money, potentially. I'm going to say that I'm going to take off the accountant hat, but I'm going to say that most 401ks will allow you at some point to roll money into a self-directed IRA where you could buy property in the name of the IRA and it's tax deferred. So therefore, it's in your retirement account. You could also do a non-recourse loan on that money. So for instance, if you had a $100,000 property, but you only had $50,000 in the account, you could actually borrow money against that property on a non-recourse loan. There's only a couple banks I'm aware of that do it in this country, but I have done it, and it was a great success. So in that scenario where it's a self-directed IRA, the cash flow every month would go into your IRA and keep building in there, as well as when you sell or buy the house, the appreciation, that the profit all goes into that account and it keeps building up momentum. We've done flips through the self-directed IRA as well, and that was building the client's cash flow. So in other words, they made $36,000 on that particular deal. So now they had, instead of 50, they had 86,000. So the next one, they kept snowballing that and hopefully do more and more. And by the time they retire, they don't have to be self-sufficient on the other assets. They would have that working for them. Other people have bought multiple, like 8 or 10 rental properties and just cash flowed on that. So the great thing about self-directed IRAs also is you could partner with yourself. So you could split the asset 50% with yourself and your IRA. So the 50% of yourself, you could take the immediate cash flow now into your pocket and deal with the taxes at that point in that year. And the other 50% stays in your IRA, and you could defer those taxes into your future earnings.
Okay. So if you had maybe a couple pieces of advice that you would give somebody who is considering becoming a real estate investor, whether they're going to buy and hold or flip or however they're going to do it, give me your 3 top pieces of advice you would give somebody thinking about that.
So 3 pieces of advice. Well, the first thing is start. Do something, because so many people go to these webinars and seminars and they end up going through all this education and they come out and then they get so tied up that they do nothing. If you make 10% of something versus nothing, it's still 10% more than you had yesterday. So partner with somebody. Reach out to somebody in your family that's interested. They may have money but not the knowledge. Use that knowledge that you learn. Get involved. The great thing about real estate is there's so many different ways to make money, like I mentioned before, but you have to get involved. Right now, as we speak in 2017, the values we're in a pretty good trajectory up, right? So we could almost feel confident that it's going to go up at 3 to 10% in this current market right now. So you're in a good situation to be able to get in the game when it's not as risky as it was maybe 5 years ago, right? So I would say get involved. Real estate typically, even if it has its ups and downs, will go up over time. And even if you had to hold it longer than necessary, you're still going to do better in the end. So I would say, number 1, just make sure you get involved. Number 2, find yourself a mentor. Definitely, whether it be a partner or a mentor, you want to get somebody that has done this before, or if not just a partner or a mentor, get a realtor that knows how to buy and sell real estate as far as investing. Like I mentioned in the beginning, my big thing is if you're going to hire somebody to help you investing, you better make sure that they've invested themselves or know how to invest, because it's easy to talk, but if you haven't walked the walk, it just doesn't make sense, because there's a lot of things you learn on the job with your own money than other people's money. All right, so that's number 2. And number 3, I would say don't be too aggressive. Be smart with your money. Do the numbers backwards. And my number 1 thing there is, my saying is, always figure out how you're getting out of an investment before you get into it. That's my 1 piece of advice there.
The exit strategy.
Yes.
So is there a certain formula that an investor should follow when they're looking at a property? Is this formula across the board on all real estate investments? Or is there like a certain formula for maybe a buy and hold rather than it be a fix and flip?
That's a great question. And the answer is really all within you, right? What are you happy making on your money? Like, for instance, right now, if your money's sitting in the bank in 2017, you're making hardly anything on your money. The banks are making all the money, right? So if you're happy making 3 to 5% a year, you can go, you just know those numbers. And when you do a buy and hold investment, if you can make 3 to 5% a year, you're beating, you want to beat inflation, right? A typical 3% average, right? So you want to make sure it's at least 5 to 7%, I would suggest. But it's really all up to you. Some people just need to move money for tax reasons. They don't need as much cash flow. So they'll go to an area that's not going to be a high cash flow, but it's a better appreciation area, right? Some other people want higher cash flow, but they're okay having an older home in a different, less desirable neighborhood, but they're going to make a lot more cash flow and less appreciation. So it really depends on that investor, what their needs and goals are. They might want to diversify into different markets and different areas of those markets. That way, if the market does change, you're not stuck with all your eggs in one basket. And I think a lot of people learned their lesson back in 05 and 06 on that.
Okay. No, that totally makes sense. So what kind of financing options are available for real estate investment? Like, I know there's hard money, there's conventional. I mean, is there different financing for different types of investments that are better, fitted? I mean, I know you're not a mortgage broker, but could you point me in the right direction on, which type of money you should use for which type of investment?
Sure. Well, let's start with what types are out there. And like you mentioned, there's hard money, which would be great for the particular situation where you're buying a flip. All right. So it's a short-term hold. You don't want to do hard money on the longer-term situation. Hard money is going to cost you potentially, and everything's negotiable. Remember that. Hard money is going to cost you a couple points in the front, percentage points of the loan amount, and then a pretty high interest rate. Let's just say 8 to 12% typically, right? But the way I look at it is, even if you use hard money and if you're making money on somebody else's money, OPM, it makes sense. You just got to make sure you have the right numbers going into it. I've done that and been very successful with that on the flips. But then we can go into private money as well. Private money is not an institution necessarily, but you could probably be a little bit less expensive on that. But it could be your cousin, it could be a neighbor or somebody that has that money, or just an institution that has private money, but it's less conventional, so to say, than qualifying for a conventional loan. It's based on the asset. I've seen people go to local banks, not the small local banks, and get private money based on the assets and the cash flow, and they lent on that. So it's a great way to create a plan for more and more investments. Then we talked about conventional loans, which if you have good credit and good income, you can go up to 5 properties with Fannie Mae and then 10 properties altogether with Freddie Mac right now. And since the crash, lending guidelines got tightened down hard. They're starting to slowly ease them back. So we're seeing that investment loans are a great way to start. It's not going to be great for a flip because you need cash right away or to close, but it'd be great for a buy and hold scenario. And with the interest rates being so low right now, it's still in the 4s, it just makes so much sense to leverage the bank's money. Back in 2007, I remember one of my investment properties, I had a 7.5%. I was happy then. Now it's 4%, and we should be buying everything, as much as we can. Then there's also different outside the box type of financing. I had mentioned self-directed IRAs before. A lot of doctors are great for this because they are interested in real estate, but they're busy with their practices. But they're able to do self-directed IRAs and pull a lot of money out of their income and save them on taxes. And what you could do is create a bank by teaching these people what a self-directed IRA is, and they could become your lender or partner. They have the option to just make an interest rate or be a percentage owner of that investment. So you can create your own bank by doing that, and a lot of investors have been able to do that.
And so that's taking their 401k, putting it into a self-directed IRA, and then using that for the investment, correct?
Correct. Yeah, they could either lend it to you as a loan and become a lien holder, just like a regular conventional loan, or they could become a partner and have a percentage of that ownership.
Okay. You touched on the taxes, but I want to go in a little bit more detail. So, what about them, and what about like capital gains tax? Can that be avoided? And, how do you go about doing it with that aspect of it?
Great. The IRS, and I'm going to say everything is based on 2017. Things could change. We don't know what the politicians are going to change in the future. But as of today, the greatest asset I see with my investors is the 1031 exchange. So if you live in your house and you're an owner-occupied, you could live in your house for 2 years or the last 5 and not pay taxes up to $500,000 if you're married, or $250,000 if you're single. But for investment properties, there's taxes, right? So if you live in the house if you own a property, an asset for under 1 year, you're going to pay your standard tax rate, the higher amount, right? If you own that property, if you invest into a property for a year and a day, it goes to a 15% flat tax on that income, okay? So if you have a good accountant, you'll probably figure out ways that to be able to write off a lot of, travel and work on the property, et cetera. So you probably knock that down a little bit, but it's something to pay attention to. Now, the great thing is that the IRS allows you to do a 1031 exchange, which is a like-kind exchange. So you could take a house that you made $100,000 profit on, and over 3 or 4 years, and buy up to 3 more properties, and put, say, of that $100,000 profit, break it into all 3 properties and leverage to buy, instead of a $100,000 house, now you have 3 properties, and now you have, let's just say you took a loan out with $30,000 down, and you bought 3 $200,000 houses, right? You are now controlling $600,000 of property where you originally started with just 100. So when that appreciates, those 3 $200,000 houses 10%, you made another $60,000 plus the cash flow you're putting into the bank. And even further down, what more aggressive people have done is that the money they deferred into the new properties, they could refinance and pull some of that out and buy more property without hitting it at that point. You're still deferring. Now, I want to point out, it's tax deferred, not tax free. People misunderstand that. So you're deferring it, so eventually you're going to pay it down the road. But the goal is to keep using the government's money, the IRS's money, to build more wealth for yourself and your family.
Okay, cool. Talk to me about the fix and flips. What is the best finance options for that?
Yeah, so fix and flips, if you're buying at the auction, you're going to need cash. So you're going to want to use your self-directed IRA money from a checkbook scenario where you would be able to roll your money into the self-directed IRA and have a checkbook ability to go down at the auction and pay cash right there to the public auctioneer. Also, private money would be good too if they approve the property prior to. And then hard money is great for short term. Like I mentioned before, it would be great for short term, but just remember that you're going to pay points and a higher interest rate. So you want to get out of that as fast as possible. So if you know that you have a fix and flip that you can get done in 90 days, that might make sense. But if you're going to have to do a longer rehab or turn it over into a different, you might have to convert it into a conventional refinance once you have the property and fixed up a little bit to get off that high interest rate.
Sure, that makes sense. So is there a typical return an investor should look at or look for when they're doing a fix and flip? Is there a standard?
Well, there's not a standard, but I mean, I think you got to look at the risk versus reward on the scenario, right? Like I mentioned earlier, if you're going to buy at the auction, you have a lot more to worry about as far as liens. Is the person still in the house? Do I have to do cash for keys for that person to get out? Because you become the bank in that scenario when you're buying at the public auction. So you have a lot of things. You don't know necessarily how much rehab cost you have 100% because you didn't see the interior. So you want to save more in reserves for that. And you're thinking as far as what your numbers are going to be, you want to add on a little bit of cushion. Wherein if you're buying a short sale that you're going to fix and flip, you already have had the chance to do due diligence and work the numbers backwards so you could do a little bit less. So like typically in this market right now in Las Vegas, there's a lot of competition. There's a lack of inventory. So our spreads are lower than they were 5 years ago. I used to have to go in and make a net of 20%. Now we're happy with a net of 10%, which is a lot less. But if you know that there's a lack of inventory, you have a better chance of getting a higher price off the bat under the $300,000 price range. And that's another thing I wanted to point out is you have to pay attention to your pool of buyers, what price range you're buying in, what your after repaired value is. If you're under the $300,000 price range in Las Vegas right now, you know that you're going to sell that house fairly quick. But if you're at a $500,000-$600,000 house, that's not. You have to plan for a longer hold on that property, so you have to adjust to that on your numbers, holding costs.
Okay, and actually that brings me right to my next question. What are some of the costs that an investor should be prepared for when they purchase a fix and flip?
Good question. So the fix and flip costs are going to be the acquisition cost. Do you have to pay somebody to bid for you, or how do you get that as a realtor commissions? You got to think that out as a cost of doing business. If you're buying at the auction, you have to look at the potential of evicting somebody, a tenant, and or cash for keys if it's a previous owner that is wanting to stay in the house and you're going to pay them to move out. It's a lot easier that way than going through the court system. And then the rehab cost, of course, I like to estimate on the particular property at least 10 to 20%, depending on how bad it is. After that, you got closing costs on both sides, on the purchase and on the resale, which is title and escrow and insurance and other fees, realtor fees again on the resale. And, I think that's pretty much it. And then, of course, your lending fees. Like, what are you paying for hard money? What are you paying for the private money? Those are costs involved, too, you have to add in there. And then on top of that, how long is it going to take to sell? And how many months of payments are you going to make on the holding cost from the time you buy it to the time you sell it?
And that totally makes sense. Okay. So what do you think that if you're working with like an investor, maybe it's a new investor, maybe it's a seasoned investor, but do you help them budget for the fixed part of the transaction to kind of estimate whether it's a good investment or, how does that work?
Yeah, we definitely work as a team because it's in my best interest to make them wealthy, so we create more business together, right? If I don't turn and burn like some other people in this world would do, right? So my goal is to make them the most amount of money possible at the lowest amount of risk, right? So yes, we'll sit down and we'll go over the numbers. Some of my investors have bought so many properties they don't need me for that, right? But typically we'll talk about the comps where they are today. Based on the value, based on the pricing it's listed at. And then we'll talk about the after repaired value and the market trends, right, which way that is going. And that's why it's important I'm on the Market Trends Committee, because you get to kind of predict almost where the market's going in the next 6 months, so you could kind of hedge your investments knowing that, hey, it's not going to go down 10% most likely based on what we see going on in our market. So that's very, very important to pay attention to your local areas, not just national. But I would say that the after repair value is very important for the realtor or the partner to know those things, because you can't go in there guessing what your number is going to be. You have to know your numbers and be very conservative. And you could always make more money, but I'd rather be conservative on the way in.
So you not only help them make sure they're buying a good investment, but you also help them get the end buyer in, correct?
Yes. We will market the property. We're a very progressive marketing strategy. As the world has changed over the last 5-7 years, the internet is the way to go, and we do target marketing with Facebook ads and Google ads, as well as a pool of investors or first-time homebuyers that are looking for properties within that area. So, and there's a lot more marketing to it, but those are the ones that are working the best today, we find.
Okay. So can you maybe clear up maybe one of the biggest myths or misconceptions you see that investors have when, maybe it's a new investor when purchasing a fix and flip?
Yeah, so the TV shows on HGTV, they're not always accurate on the numbers. Yeah, so every client starts with that idea, and it's a great show, but they don't tell you the true numbers, and it's not always pie in the sky. So you got to be very, very good with your numbers and conservative. And like I mentioned many times, partner or get a realtor that knows what they're doing, because it's TV's made to sell audience, right? But this is your money. And you want to make sure you don't lose money, because there might be a lot of things behind the walls or things you haven't gone through in your life that we have, and we could save you that cost of learning it yourself.
Okay, cool. So, all right, so let's talk about a little bit more in detail about buy and hold. Mm-hmm. What are the types of options available, and what are the financing that would go with these types of options?
So buy and hold is a great strategy. Most of my investors that do it buy multiple properties, and their goal is to buy as many as possible so they can live off of the rental income off the properties when they want to retire or have the ability to do so. The financing options are, I would start with conventional financing, because that is the easiest course with the interest rates being so low right now, and it's most affordable. I would say you want to try to do 20% so you don't pay mortgage insurance. If you don't know what mortgage insurance is, it's a monthly. If you put less than 20% down, the bank has to protect itself and get insurance, so they're going to charge you for that. So you want to put at least 20% down if possible, and sometimes the rates are better at a 25% down. So you want to look at your options there on your leverage and see what works best. So buy and hold, it's basically, it's for savings, basically. The tenant is paying for your mortgage over time, and you're hoping to get appreciation as well. So that with pushing down the mortgage payment and also the appreciation, those two together could make a great recipe for success in the future.
Okay, so you kind of answered both of those questions. Which financing option would be best for that type of transaction with the buy and hold?
Conventional. Conventional.
Mm-hmm. What about not an IRA or anything like that? If it's personal?
Yeah. So good question. So conventional would be the most affordable typically. However, if you could use the self-directed IRA money to be the bank for that, then it's actually not a bad idea, because you're building the wealth within the IRA, or somebody else is building the wealth in the IRA. And the great thing about self-directed IRAs is this is not their money that they're using day to day. This is money in their retirement, so they're a little bit less. It's hard to have somebody that's looking over your shoulder. Where's the money going every day? It gets to be complicated when you have investors that are wanting to be too involved, because you want to be in control of it. So the self-directed IRA money is good, because they're going to see their dividends going up every year, and they're going to want to give you more money. They're not going to want to take it back. They're going to love to see those returns compared to what they were getting potentially on the different investments that they have. So yeah, self-directed IRA is great. I would stay away from the private and the hard money on those if you could, unless you got really good terms.
So let's talk about the type of investment or the type of numbers that somebody should look at when they're purchasing a buy and hold. Like, is there certain KPIs you're looking for? How do you know it's a good investment?
Well, I go backwards a little bit. Like I mentioned earlier, I like to know how I'm getting out of it, the exit strategy. Like, I'm looking for an area that I could resell it eventually. It might be a great place for first-time home buyers. I don't want to have a place that's oversaturated with tenants, so that way the potential of rents going down is higher. I want to go to an area that people want to live in, whether it be a certain demographic breakdown or an area of town that was close to something that was important, like, their jobs or something, like quality of life issues. Like, for instance, in Las Vegas, people that work on the Strip want to be within so many miles of the Strip. So I wanted to try to keep my investments closer within range of the Strip where people have to move them back and forth to work. All right. And my also goal is to keep the price range lower so that way my cash flow is higher based on the rents in the area. You don't necessarily go up as much in rent in the nicer areas as according to the price. So you want to look at those areas in each individual city specifically, because Las Vegas may be different than New York, or et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. And what are some of the costs and fees that you should be prepared for when you purchase a buy and hold?
Right. So the good thing about the buy and hold is you're going to be able to go in and do your due diligence prior to purchasing it. So you're going to know you're pretty much, if you have a good team, and that's something I didn't mention before, you have a great team of contractor, inspector, all these people in your circle, and your realtor that knows investments should have that for you so you could plug and play like we do. We have somebody who can go out on a moment's notice and go and do a walkthrough, and we know that he knows his numbers because he's going to be doing the work, and he can give you a fair estimate. Hey, listen, we need to put $15,000 into this house for buy and hold, but maybe $20,000 if we're going to resell it and flip it. There's two different numbers. There's a buy and hold number, which you're going to make it serviceable for the tenant living in it. And then there's the flip number. You might want to put a little bit of extra into that property. Maybe instead of the regular countertops, you put granite in it. So those are things you're going to look at for which investment you're doing. But yes, we want to know those numbers going into it. And there's not a specific number. We just got to find out where we're buying it at and what the ARV is and work those numbers backwards. And if you're happy with that return after the management cost, that's another cost that we didn't mention earlier, is the property management cost. That's typically going to be 8 to 10% gross rent on a buy and hold. So you want to know those numbers going into it and interview a couple different managers to see if they work for you. We have a list always of 3 that we like, but it's really important to find a manager that works well with the way you work, because some people have different systems in place that will work better for others.
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense. So what, as a real estate agent, what is your role in the transaction? I mean, do you help everything from the purchase to, helping them, pointing in the right direction, who's going to fix it, to getting tenants? What is your role?
I love football. I'm a Giants fan, and I consider myself consider myself the quarterback of the situation, right? So it's your job to make sure it's moving along at the right process. So it all depends on how much the investor needs and wants, right? We could do from A to Z, or we could just plug in where they need us. We're happy to do this full service and start them and walk them through the process, and we do that every day, meaning from the beginning to find the property that we could look at and analyze and see if it works for them. And then also, I spend more time saying no to properties for people than saying yes. I'd rather do that than get into a bad investment. So moving forward from there, we would help them with getting the contractors and, like I said, the team of people that we know, that we trust, that will give us good numbers. Get out there, give us the estimates on what the repair cost would be so we can go in and submit an offer that makes sense with the numbers that we know we're going to have to put out of pocket based on the after repair value. And then at the end, when they're ready to rent it out, I just had a veteran buy an investment property, and I gave him websites to do his own property management. He wanted to do it himself. He was local. And I gave him websites to do background checks and all that stuff. So that way he didn't have to pay for a property manager. Now, I do say that 99% of people should not do that themselves. They should hire the manager. It's worth the money because you don't want to have to get into that job of being a slumlord. You want to make sure that they're doing it, and there's a layer of protection there for you to know the laws of the rental laws and all that. So I would suggest that you pay a property manager 8 to 10% of the gross rent. And as you buy more properties, you could probably negotiate that down a little bit.
So what do you think the biggest myth or misconception somebody has when they're thinking of, purchasing a buy and hold property?
I think one thing to pay attention to is the rent turnover and the cost of the turnover. Like, for instance, if you buy a fourplex in Las Vegas, the numbers look great on paper, but when you realize the location and the age of the homes, the deferred maintenance costs are way higher than it would be on a regular residential resale property, potentially, that was in a better neighborhood. Even though on paper in the beginning it looks much better and juicier, at the end of the day, in probably 5 years, you probably would have wished you went with a single-family house and end up making more money on cash flow than you would with the one that looked better in the beginning. You just have to look at what you're getting into and the risk level.
Okay. Yeah, that actually completely makes sense. So if you had one piece of advice, for somebody looking to buy and hold, what would that be?
I would say know what your number is. Know how much money a month you're okay with making cash flow on the money you're putting down, right? So if you put 20% down, are you okay with making $100, $200, $300 cash flow? And then I would say that first year, keep that cash flow into a reserve account for future problems that could arise. And then another thing that we like to do is get a home warranty on the property so it covers you for that year if anything major breaks. And we put in a lease agreement for the tenant to pay up to $100 in the first $100 of repair costs, which would be the deductible for that. So you're protecting yourself from out-of-pocket expenses, which is going to hurt your ROI, return on investment. So we try to teach you that to help keep your cash flow high.
Okay. I think that your knowledge is extensive, and especially in the Las Vegas market. I think anybody looking to either buy, sell, or especially an investor, if they're looking for a real estate expert to work with, it's definitely you. And I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Alicia. It's been great talking to you, and I truly love what I do, and then I share the passion to give back to my local community. But investing is something that's really fun to do, and real estate's great. So I would just suggest everybody gets involved at some point. Most of the wealthy people in this country are based on real estate first.
If somebody wanted to get a hold of you for your services, how would they go about doing that?
Sure, they could call or text me at 702-250-1090. That's 702-250-1090. You could email me at Billy, BILLY, at ALTGROUPLV.com. That's Billy at altgrouplv.com.
Awesome. Well, again, I appreciate your time today. All right, guys, you just heard from Billy Elt, a real estate expert out of Las Vegas, Nevada. And this is your host, Alicia DeBrell from Insight Media. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.